Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this in-service training on what Title 17 means. And Title 17 is specific to the state of California. And because other states have different names or titles for the same services that individuals with developmental disabilities receive. And these services are under a federal program, and so Title 17 is a way that governs how services are delivered to individuals with developmental disabilities through the California Department of Developmental Services. So under the at the top of everything is Department of Developmental Services. And then below them are the 21 centers, are your vendors of the different services that individuals are entitled to receive here in the state of California. And services are uh, the ability to receive services are from birth to death. However, you have to be identified and eligible for services before your 18th birthday. And you have to be registered under with some type of eligibility, again, identified before your 18th birthday. Okay. And if identified after your 18th birthday, then you have to prove that you had that disability and able to prove it with documentation before you turned 18. All right. So let's get started. Any questions, ladies and gentlemen? And through the in-service trainings that I do, for those of you that are here from previous trainings, that I'll use different people's names that are involved in the training as examples. I enjoy questions. I look for people to ask questions, and I truly believe that no question is stupid. I believe that when you leave a training, you should understand the training. And if you don't understand the training, then why didn't you ask a question? Okay. Why didn't you ask the question so that it could answer any question that you had? All right. Okay. So let's move on. In-service training, and that's what you guys are receiving, is a series of in-service trainings. And this training focuses on the different areas of in-service training through Title 17 and what those trainings and their goals and objectives are. Okay. So it is mandatory for staff who provide support in residential and community-based programs. These requirements apply to vendors, administrators, and direct care staff. So supported living falls under a community-based program. And you would think, wait a minute, they live in their home. Why isn't it under residential? And that's a good question to ask yourself. However, residential, that under its definition here is a facility, some type of facility where the individual does not have a rental agreement to reside in that place, in that facility, in that apartment or home. They may have a placement agreement. However, a rental agreement states that the individual must pay rent to continue staying there. And for you, of those of you who've worked in a facility, may I see a show of hands of people who've worked in a facility? If you've ever worked in a facility, a question this time, just raise your hand. Nellie, do we have any hands?
No, we don't have any hands. There's nothing in the chat. If anybody's
Okay.
work, you can feel free to drop it in the chat.
Yeah, drop it in the chat. So in a facility, individuals, they don't pay rent. They're Rent is taken care of through the regional center because they pay the vendor directly for the individual staying there. Okay. So, any questions before I go on? Any questions before I go into core training requirements? No? Okay.
No, and I don't
So,
see any questions in the chat.
okay. Thank you, Nellie. So, core training requirements for direct care staff. And that would be you, ladies and gentlemen. That would be the SLS instructor. Okay. That would also be for your supervisors and as well as for the agency director, because at times they may have to provide services and supports to individuals. Okay. Let me get rid of my paragraph markers there, ladies and gentlemen, there. That way you can read it nicely. So initial orientation before or shortly after hire. So under Title 17 regulations, Section 56038, all new direct care staff must receive orientation within their first 40 hours of providing service. This orientation must cover specific areas. Number one, program design and service model. Number two, the individual's program plans, which are IPPs. Number three, individuals' rights under Title 17. And if you remember the other day, we talked about the individual's rights under Title 17. Medication assistance, okay? Now, I'd like to talk about that just for a moment, and we will do medication training in this course of in-service trainings. You are not administering medication. No, you're not a doctor. You're not a pharmacist. You're assisting with the medication pass. And so I really want to make sure that you start using those words, that you assisted Margaret with her medication. You assisted Fred with his medication, okay? And not I gave Margaret his medication, her medication, okay? It deals with health and emergency procedures. And it deals also with identification and reporting of special incidents. And special incidents has its own section in Title 17, and that section is 54327. Okay. And it identifies and reporting of individual abuse. Okay. So, any questions, ladies and gentlemen, on the initial orientation that should happen within the first 40 hours of providing service, ladies and gentlemen? Any questions? Okay. So here we go, ongoing in-service training. And that's what you're receiving. This is what you're receiving now. This is what you've received in the past. And Title 17 requires annual continuing education hours, and the number of hours depends on the service level. Now, service level 2, 3, and 4, those deal with facilities. And so that's not applicable in this situation, okay? However, all other service codes, which includes supported living, is a minimum of 12 hours a year plus experience and additional training. So it depends on the additional training, depends on if you're in a supervisory category, if you are a medical individual and have a license, you may require additional training to maintain your license so that you can continue utilizing your license. So that in itself may require additional hours of continuing education, okay? And acceptable continuing education topics must relate directly to the implementation of IPPs, promote of individual rights, health, and safety, social and physical integration, And the interdisciplinary team, which is called the IDT process. And I'd like to talk about several of these, if I may, and expand further, especially with the promotion of the individual's rights, health, and safety, especially when an individual has a new diagnosis, especially if it's medical or psychiatric, and it's not a well-known diagnosis, then definitely in-service training should be completed to all agency staff, and with special focus on the individual, the staff members that work with that individual. Okay. And so you'll see a lot of different disorders. I know pica, very few people have heard about pica. It is out there, as well as, say, Prader-Willi. A lot of people have not heard about that. And you may get an individual who has that. So it's really important that if a new diagnosis is discovered with one of your individuals, then in-service training should be performed so that, number one, everyone understands what the diagnosis looks like, maybe some potential side effects of the diagnosis. Are there behaviors associated with that? Is there going to be physical discomfort or changes in their well-being because of the diagnosis? And then most importantly, what are some things that you can do to assist this individual and support them so that the diagnosis is not always as detrimental as it could be if left untreated or unmonitored. And that also, ladies and gentlemen, helps build a rapport with your individuals. And, you know, we've talked about that in previous trainings of building a rapport with your individual. And that building of that rapport will allow a relationship to form, which involves respect, and respect from you to the individual and from the individual to you. Okay, all righty. And then I'd like to talk about the social and physical integration with individuals. And unfortunately, a lot of individuals do not have a lot of social interaction. And so when you do introduce social interaction, unfortunately, some may not know how to appropriately behave. And so through in-service trainings, you'll be able to better support your individual so that if they go out in public, you can provide the guidance, assistance, training, and education that that individual would benefit from to be a better participant and to be a better active member of their community. Okay? All right. Any questions, ladies and gentlemen, before we go on into staff training plans and vendor responsibilities? Any thoughts? Any comments? No? Okay, moving on. So staff training plans. Now, here's the vendor's responsibility on that. So again, as we said, SLS falls under community-based day programs and vendors. And so Title 17, Section 56726 allows vendors to develop a written staff training plan. If a plan exists, it must define the amount, type, subjects, and frequency of training, include new employee orientation and ongoing training topics, okay, and include individual safety and emergency procedures, and be documented for compliance review. Orientation under this section must include the Welfare and Institution Code sections related to developmental services, Title 17 rights, an overview of the developmental service system, and vendor-specific policies and job duties. And so I'm sure each of you understands your job duties as an SLS instructor and what you're required to do to assist, support, train, and educate your individuals that you work with. Because that's the philosophy of SLS. SLS is not about caring for people. Caring, the word care is not in SLS regulations. It's not. The only time it's talked about as part of a word is healthcare. And it'll say, what healthcare coverage do you have? Or what healthcare diagnoses do you have? But the word care does not exist in SLS. Okay. Any questions on that, ladies and gentlemen? For staff training plans, what the vendor's responsibility is? No? Okay, moving on. Required training on individual rights. And that was what we did the other day. Okay. So Title 17 explicitly protects the rights of persons with developmental disabilities, and staff training must address these rights. Covered rights include dignity, privacy, and humane care, freedom from abuse, neglect, and excessive medication, access to medical care, advocacy, and courts, social interaction, community integration, and recreation. This content is not optional. It is a required training subject for staff supporting adults. Okay. And as we talked about in our rights training, the rights that individuals receive now was non-existent prior to the Lanterman Act. And the Lanterman Act really opened the door for individuals throughout the state of California. And it also opened the door for other states to for individuals with developmental and or intellectual disabilities to begin receiving the same services and things that other typical people in society would receive. Okay. Any questions, ladies and gentlemen? Nellie, nothing?
No, there are no questions. I don't see any hands or anything in the chat.
Okay. All right. So documentation and compliance. That is the most important part of any program that you have, any agency that you have, and what falls under what's my about progress notes. Who can name me my two things about progress notes for those old timers that have been with me, for the new people, because Eduardo may not know this answer. So can anyone who's been with me tell me what two things do progress notes do for you as an SLS instructor? Who is willing to speak out and say the two sentences?
It's your
Anyone?
job, it's your job security and your get out
Mm-hmm.
of jail free card.
Thank you. Thank you. It is your job security and your get out of jail free card. Yes, it is, because progress notes will say what actually happened during your shift. So if you have a difficult and challenging individual, Fred, I always use Fred and Margaret. If Fred is very challenging and everyone is writing accurate notes during their shift, describing what's actually happening. And I'm going to pick someone out of the thing. So don't be offended if I pick you. Ramona, I've picked you before. Hello, Ramona. Good morning. Good Sunday morning. So, Ramona, is choosing, because see, writing notes is a choice. And she's choosing, I don't feel like writing. I'm just going to take it easy. So she writes, Fred had a good day, no problems, no issues, ate all of his meds, ate all of his food, took meds, no problem. How long did that take? A minute to write? I mean, let's be real. A minute to write. Rather than writing what actually happened during the shift. And so people tend to forget progress notes are a legal document. And so if something happened on your shift and you choose not to write it and send a text if it's really important or something that needs to be identified, possibly an SI, a special incident report written about it, and you choose not to take action, then when the incident does come out, but Ramona, you didn't write anything. Well, I forgot. Now it may appear that you're telling a lie to cover yourself and say, well, it did happen. I just didn't write it. Well, but why didn't you write it from the beginning? And so that's what I want to impress upon you, ladies and gentlemen. Take the time, sit and write the notes. You know, I've provided direct assistance and support to individuals. I've been an agency director. I've done it. And if you don't sit down and take 5 minutes to write what happened during your shift, you may be doing yourself a disservice. Okay. So again, progress notes are job security and your get out of jail card. And thank you so much for saying that. I appreciate you speaking out, Mani. Thank you. So let's
Sorry,
continue.
Joy. Dominga also had Dominga's been with us in the beginning. She put it in the chat. I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you, Dominga. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you, Dominga. Title 17 requires that all training be documented, including dates, topics, duration, and staff attendance. This documentation is subject to Regional Center and DDS review during compliance activities. And so every year, initially with a new vendor, you are audited your first year, second year through the Regional Center Quality Assurance Department. After that, it may be every 2 years, every 3 years. So it just depends on the Regional Center and the QA department, okay? Authoritative sources for training content. You can base or your audit, your in-service training using these official sources. So you can go through California Department of Developmental Services, Laws and Regulations, Title 17, their text and guidance, or you can go through California Code of Regulations, Title 17, and then you want to search the regulatory language that you're looking for, okay? So that's it for my Title 17 training. And I would also like to add, Title 17 is the Bible you live by. It will tell you everything you need to know about how you need to operate as an SLS instructor and as an agency. So I really would like, anyone who has any questions regarding Title 17, any thoughts or comments, if you would now please ask those questions. Does anyone have a thought, comment, issue? No? Nellie, anyone in the chat?
No one in the chat either.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much. Let me just stop the recording. Give me